So while they're trying to fix it, I will continue to talk and be the guinea pig. So just as electricity, telecommunications, and the combustion engine fundamentally altered American economics, in the second industrial revolution, nanotechnology is poised to drive the next surge of economic growth across all sectors. Nanotechnology refers to the ability to manipulate matter between 1 and 100 billionths of a meter, an endeavor that is no small feat, pun intended. This capability is helping solve long, intractable problems. For example, as computers get smaller, the problem of heat generation becomes more and more severe, and nanotech could hold the solution. Currently, there are natural barriers to making transistors, semiconductors, and computers any smaller because the heat generated during use destroys the material if that material is below a certain size. The ability to harness the inertia of an electron could one day allow a computer to operate on its own recycled waste heat. This capability is called spintronics, and it would allow electronic computer parts to break through that size barrier. Dr. Bieniek, who is here from the University of Nebraska, probably off of the Big Ten Media Days in Chicago, will expand on the idea of spintronics and describe his excellent work in this area of nanotechnology. Advances in nanotech don't just mean we can make things smaller. It's the ability to harness matter in the nanometer level, which has applications across many industries. In medicine, nanotech research has revealed that advanced nerve regeneration and cancer detection, diagnosis, and treatment methods could be just around the corner. In manufacturing, nanotech research has allowed us to make better materials. For example, nanocomposites can be used to decrease the weight of the bumper on a car while enhancing its resistance to dents and scratches. And with 3 teenage boys, that is appreciated. And wires used to transmit electricity made from carbon nanotubes could one day eliminate such much of the electricity loss that occurs in transmission. Today we seek to learn more about what obstacles stand in the way of nanotech research, but also any barriers that exist between the research and development stage and full-scale commercialization. There is no question that the U.S. is a leader in nanotech researching, but as U.S. researchers make new discoveries and the applications are revealed, I'm concerned that other countries are doing more to facilitate nanotech development than we are. Nanotech is a true science race between the nations, and we could be encouraging the transition from research breakthroughs to commercial development. I believe the U.S. should excel in this area. Historically, we have a great track record on generating startups, which is fueled by our entrepreneurial spirit in this country. However, for the first time since the Census Bureau started measuring this statistic, more businesses are failing than starting in the United States. 400,000 businesses are born annually nationwide, while 470,000 are not failing. That's disturbing statistic. Accordingly, I'm curious as to whether, given this hostile business climate, there are regulatory obstacles to adoption of nanotechnology in the commercial context. As Dr. Bieniek notes in his testimony, Moore's law tells us that the performance-to-cost ratio of computing power doubles every 18 months or so. I believe we ought to be careful not to slow down the progress described by Moore's law with more laws. Again, I thank our witnesses, and introductions will be right after the ranking member's opening statement. Yield to the ranking member, Jan Schakowsky, for her statement.
Well, it looks like our macro technology may have been fixed. I'm not sure. Is this working? There's sound here. Okay. So I want to thank you, Chairman Terry, for holding this important hearing on the issue of nanotechnology. I look forward to hearing from each of our accomplished witnesses about this exciting field. I was about to ask you all for some help here, I figured. maybe the scientists know. But I would like to take this opportunity to introduce one of the witnesses today. Dr. Milan Mrksik is a professor at my hometown school of Northwestern University and a leader in the field of nanotechnology. Dr. Mrksik has focused his research on biomedical advances that would not be possible without the development of nanotechnology. He has been involved in research that has made Chicago one of the premier destinations around the world for nanotechnology, from research and development on Northwestern's campus to the commercialization at the nearby Illinois Science and Technology Park and other sites. So I look forward to getting his valuable perspective on this. From real-time monitoring of critical infrastructure to water purification to more effective treatment of cancer, nanotechnology has the potential to solve some of the world's most important challenges. Few fields of scientific research have as much breadth or potential. That being said, nanotechnology's impact on public health and our environment is not yet well understood. Certain studies have indicated potential hazards, for example, titanium dioxide nanoparticles, which are used in sunscreen to block UV light, can also kill microbes used to treat municipal water supplies. That's why we need to be careful to ensure that federal regulators responsible for public health and chemical exposure, from EPA to FDA to CPSC, coordinate efforts to better understand any possible toxicity of nanomaterials and protect the public from harmful impacts while enabling their beneficial use. The United States recognized the promise of nanotechnology early on, and the National Nanotechnology Initiative has benefited from nearly $20 billion in federal investment since 2000. Other world leaders have followed suit, and more than $70 billion in global investment in nanotechnology over the same period. The federal government must continue to play a lead role in supporting nano research and development. Last year, Congress appropriated $1.5 billion for nanotechnology, more than 10% below the administration's request, however. According to the GAO, some other nations may already have surpassed the U.S. in terms of public investment in nanotech, and we can be sure that those competitors will maintain significant investments in this promising field moving forward. Congress, I believe, should commit to adequate support of cutting-edge research, and I hope all of my colleagues will join in working to increase national nanotechnology initiative funding moving forward. We should focus on the areas of nanotech pipeline that are in the most need of additional support. There is a demonstrated lack of financing for nanotech as it moves from the development stage to the commercialization stage. I'm concerned that without consistent and significant financial backing, the advancement of nano in this country could slow. We should work to ensure that promising technologies, especially those that can save and sustain human lives, have the support needed to reach and benefit the public. Again, I'm very excited about the promise nanotechnology holds for our country and the world. I look forward to hearing the perspectives of our witnesses today, especially about where we go from here. And I yield back my time.
Does anybody wish to make an opening statement on the Republican side?
Mr. Chairman, introduction, please, sir.
Yeah, well, I will do that right now then. So hold on. So our witnesses today, I want to thank all four of you for being here. We have three universities represented that are leaders in nanotech development and research, and I will just take a personal note and say we allowed one outside of the Big Ten. So I want to introduce from the University of Nebraska, Professor of Physics and Astronomy, Christian Bienek. Then we also have Milan Mrksik from, he's a Henry Wade Rogers Professor of Biomedical Engineering, Chemistry, and Cell and Molecular Biology at Northwestern University. And Jim Phillips, Chairman and CEO of Nanotech Incorporated. And now I yield for opening statement / introduction to the gentleman from Houston, Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As our guests can see by my nameplate, another rice owl is in the house this morning. That owl is James Tour. Dr. Tour and I share a common idol, the late Dr. Rick Smalley, who won a Nobel Prize in 1996 for his work in nanotechnology at Rice. Dr. Smalley changed my life by showing me that I had no future, none, in nanotechnology. After my freshman year of chemistry with him, that was pretty apparent. But he changed Dr. Tour's life by recruiting him to Rice to be a leader in the Nanoscience and Technology Institute. Dr. Tour is the perfect witness to teach this committee about nanotechnology. He has created a thing called Nano Kids to educate kids K through 12 about nanotechnology. If he can teach a fourth grader, man, he can surely teach members of Congress. So with that observation, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
We can all hope. So if you guys have, any of you testified before? A couple of you, good. For the two that haven't, this is an information hearing. It is not like a GM hearing where you have to raise your hand and get grilled. You're here to teach us. We want to hear what your work has been about, and we appreciate your testimony, of which most of us have read. So we will start from my left to right. You have 5 minutes. There should be a clock up there if you want to look up. If you're still speaking about the 5-minute mark, I'll just kind of lightly tap the gavel, which will is the international symbol for wrap it up. So with that, recognize the gentleman from the University of Nebraska, Dr. Bayh-Dole.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me and having this opportunity here to testify, and also thank you, Congressman and Madam Congresswoman. So,
can you pull your microphone just a little bit closer? There you
I'm
go.
faculty at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and also an active nano scientist. And I would like to give you a smooth start, let's say, into nanoscience and nanotechnology. So maybe we can start with the question, what is that all about? And starting by the prefix of the word nano, which actually comes from the Greek word nanos and means dwarf. So we deal with something very small, as we all know by now. But what we probably lack is an intuition for what it means, 1/1000th of a meter. So we need actually a proper ruler, so to say, to have comparison. And if we think of something small, we may think, for example, of the red blood cell in our bloodstream. But it turns out that is actually on the order of 6 microns in diameter. So a nanometer is 10,000 times smaller than that. Or maybe it's better to look at the molecular scale, and then we would identify a nanometer as being 5 atoms next to each other. So that gives us the scale, and that sets the stage for Feynman's celebrated remark, there's plenty of room at the bottom. Indeed, we can, so to say, create and hope to create nanostructures from the bottom up, which are extremely small, much, much smaller, for example, than a cell, and have function. And can, for example, travel in our bloodstream and monitor and maybe even increase health. So that was Feynman's vision of swallowing the doctor, as he called it. From there, I would like now to switch over and give us an idea of what is the special physics that happens at the nanoscale. What are those emerging properties at the nanoscale? And again, it is Feynman who asked the question, what happens if we can arrange atoms at will? And today we are actually in a position where we can start to do that. We can image and manipulate atoms at will. And the answer is that if we can do that, then we can basically design materials properties at will, because it turns out that all material properties, I mean literally all of them, electric, magnetic, optic, thermal, mechanic, you name it, they all depend on the underlying atomic structure. So if we can arrange atoms at will on the nanoscale, then we can design within certain limits, for example, dictated by quantum mechanical laws, we can design materials properties. Now, that's not the end of the story. We can actually do more. an example for such a design for nanostructures would be a simple but effective example would be nanoparticles specifically tailored in magnetic properties to be applied in a magnetic hyperthermia way of potential cancer treatment. But we can do more. We can bring different materials into close proximity. We have tools now, for example, multi-layer thin film growth techniques, and we bring materials A and B in proximity, which traditional chemistry doesn't allow us to do. And when that happens, new effects, new physical phenomena can emerge at the interface. In that sense, the whole is indeed more as the parts A and B. Or as Herbert Krömer said it already 40 years ago, today we can say the interface itself is the device. So from there we can now speculate and we can build a larger, more complex structures, nanostructures. And we have the tools to do that from the bottom up, like scanning probe microscopy, or from top down. And with all that, we can look a little bit into the future and can see that nanotechnology will certainly transform information technology, medical applications, energy, water supply, smart materials, and manufacturing. And there is, specifically in the information technology, there is a non-linear trend going on now for 5 decades, known as Moore's Law, where we can see that the performance-to-cost ratio is actually exponentially growing, so beyond our actual intuition. To give you an example, the hard disk drives of IBM from 1956 had less than 5 megabyte storage capacity, was 2 refrigerators big and weighed 2 tons. 50 years later, we could make hard disk drive with 100 gigabyte capacity of storage and adjust the size of the deck of cards. That is a 100 million-fold improvement in that kind of performance-to-cost ratio. So the industry is well aware that Moore's law is not necessarily a law of nature. It can and most likely seems right now to stop and to come to an end. And there are processes funded, like spintronics, where I'm involved, which allow us to tackle those problems and come to new types of electronics where we utilize the spin degree of freedom as just one example. So I'm running out of time here. I would like just to conclude with an impact nanotechnology most likely has on society and economy. We need to recognize that nanotechnology is highly interdisciplinary and that there's a positive feedback which excels the progress. We have to prepare the workforce for this interdisciplinarity and have to continue funding from the industry side and from the government side. With that, let me thank you for it.
Thank you, Dr. Bienek. Dr. Tour, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
My name is James Tour, and I'm the T.T. and W.F. Chow Professor of Chemistry, Professor of Material Science and Nanoengineering, and Professor of Computer Science at the Richard Smalley Institute for Nanoscale Science and Technology at Rice University in Houston, Texas. Rice's home is the home of nanotechnology, where carbon-60 was discovered. I have over 500 research publications and 70 patents in nanotechnology in the fields of nanomedicine for treatment of traumatic brain injury, stroke, and autoimmune diseases, nanomaterials including graphene and carbon nanotubes for electronics, optics, and composites, and high surface area nanomaterials for environmental capture of carbon dioxide and for water purification. All of these technologies are licensed to companies from my laboratory at Rice University, and all are transitioning from basic research to deployment in the U.S. and abroad. It is possible for Congress to directly improve the research enterprise in U.S. universities and to mitigate the current brain drain of our best and brightest scientists and engineers. And this can be done without commitment of any new spending. Among the most ingenious pieces of legislation, in my view, was the Bayh-Dole Act dealing with intellectual property arising from federal government-funded research. Prior to the enactment of the Bayh-Dole Act, the U.S. government had accumulated 28,000 patents, but fewer than 5% of those patents were commercially licensed. The key change made by Bayh-Dole was ownership of the inventions that were made by federal funding. Bayh-Dole permits a university, small business, or nonprofit institution to elect to pursue ownership of an invention in preference to the government. Government got out of the way, and this spawned enormous entrepreneurial endeavors and led to startup companies and jobs being birthed throughout the country. And most interestingly, the legislation required no new allocation of funds. Unfortunately, there's been a dramatic loss of research funding to U.S. universities on a per-investigator basis over the past 5 years. The situation has become untenable. Not only are our best and brightest international students returning to their home countries upon graduation, taking our advanced technology expertise with them, but our top professors are moving abroad in order to keep their programs funded. The trolling by foreign universities upon top U.S. faculty has become rampant due to the declination of U.S. funding levels on a per-faculty member basis. The brain drain is not something that we can recover. The impact of what has already been lost will last decades. And I'm not here to present to you an apocalyptic scene and then cry for money to slow the problem. I realize the cupboards in Washington are bare, and I offer you a no new spending solution. I have a large research laboratory, 30 graduate students and postdocs working busily to make new nanotechnology discoveries and translate those into exploitable applications. In 2008, my program was 90% federally supported and 10% industrially supported. Then, for the first time in my 26-year career as a faculty researcher, I could no longer survive. One federal grant after another was unfunded. So I started to appeal to industry, showing them how our nanotechnology research could solve technical problems in their industries. Presently, if a company funds research at an academic institution through a sponsored research agreement, thereby guaranteeing the company access to research reports and their setting of milestones, then the company loses the benefits of a significant tax deduction of their allocation of funds. In other words, their allocation to sponsored research no longer has the same tax-deductible benefits as a non-research-based gift would have afforded them. I'm asking Congress to consider legislation that would incentivize industry to fund academic research universities and nonprofits by granting the companies with a total or significant tax deduction for such university research investments. This permits companies to take up the slack where the federal government has been unable to maintain the research enterprise. Help me and my colleagues to raise our own research funds through partnerships with corporations. If I can explain to industries that there will be a complete or significant tax deduction for the sponsored research agreement, then I can sell my research to them with the utmost attractiveness. Let me close with this. King Solomon wrote in Proverbs 25:11, "Like apples of gold in settings of silver is a ruling rightly given." I pray your kind consideration for new Bayh-Dole-like ingenious legislation to be enacted, mollifying the dire conditions facing the U.S. research enterprise and loss of our U.S.-trained scientists and engineers. This legislation would require no new federal allocations, and it can become part of the holistic approach to funding of academic science. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Merksek, you are now recognized for your 5 minutes.
There it is. The last name's not easy. My mother-in-law has struggled with it for many years. But I'm currently the Henry Wade Rogers Professor at Northwestern University with appointments in chemistry, biomedical engineering, and cell biology. I direct a research lab that develops nanomaterials for applications in drug discovery, in diagnostics, and medical devices. I've also been involved in the translation of university-based science into companies, having co-founded SamDTech, 480 Biomedical, a stent company, and Arsenal Medical. And I'm glad to be here to share some of my perspectives. As you've heard, the nanotechnology field has been enabled by the development of methods that can create materials with dimensions that are tiny, thousands of times smaller than the width of a hair. And we now know that the properties of a material that can vary strongly on their dimensions, and we have the ability to tailor-make materials with novel and important properties. And this is a broad-based field, unlike traditional disciplines. It cuts across the entire science and engineering enterprise and has really led to paradigm-shifting technology across the board. The National Nanotechnology Initiative recognized this transformative potential and required federal agencies across the board to invest in nano. And that really was important to creating a national strength and infrastructure in this new and exciting area. At Northwestern, we started the International Institute for Nanotechnology, now one of the largest such centers. This partners with departments across campus, and to date has raised over $600 million in research funding to develop this next generation of technology. It's also trained hundreds of students, many of which are now faculty members across the globe in this area. This investment has already led to a nascent but growing and important industry. Again, at Northwestern, our institute has seen about 25 companies get started, and those have raised greater than $700 million in research support to commercialize their products. And these success stories aren't unique, of course, to Illinois. They're found across our nation. At the same time, there's a wide recognition that a lack of predefined regulatory processes can still present challenges to the commercialization of nanotechnologies. Regulations for safety and environmental impact are important. They should be effective at providing for the public's concerns and safety, but they need to be tailored to different classes of materials used in different sectors, and they need to be defined to remove the risk of uncertainty that product developers face when taking on these initiatives. Similarly, the manufacturing methods and standards that will be important to all companies in this space are still not well developed. We don't have the standard tools we can rely on to produce in volume products based on nanomaterials. And this is an area where a public-private partnership based perhaps on the National Network for Manufacturing Innovation Centers could be quite effective at providing the entire industry with engineering practices that will enable the growth of this area. I'd like to add comments to the theme of globalization that we've heard. The scientific and economic promise of nanotechnology has certainly been recognized by our foreign partners and competitors. And recent trends in those regions point to challenges that the United States has not faced before. First, governments in Europe and Asia continue to make targeted investments in nanotechnology with annual growth rates that are in the double digits and approaching 50% in China. Second, the culture and infrastructure has changed in Europe and Asia. And unlike 10 and 15 years ago, researchers there are quite effective at starting new companies. And finally, as you've heard, we're seeing the recruitment of our best scientists to full-time and part-time positions in other countries. And the globalization has certainly had and will have many benefits, but it will also level the global playing field for translating basic research into commercial entities, and it will dilute the positive impact of nanotechnology on our own economy. We must act now to ensure that our early investment and the very substantial impact it is positioned to deliver can be realized. We must renew our support for fundamental research in the nanosciences, as this will retain and continue to attract the best researchers to the United States and keep our development pipeline full. We must remove barriers that make it challenging to start new companies that are in the early stages of product development. We must develop effective regulatory standards, but also clear standards that remove the risk of uncertainty that many companies face in product development. And we must make the patent system more efficient and remove the 5 or more year delay it can take to realize patent protection and keep out would-be competitors. We must engage our partners in industry, academia, and the government to create a manufacturing toolbox and kit that's universal and, again, serves the entire field. I thank you for your time, your attention, your service to the country, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips, you are now recognized for your 5 minutes.
Manufacturer of nanotechnology. You know, it's a great time to be alive. With the inventions of the chip and the software, storage, and the internet, more will be invented in the next 10 years than in the history of mankind. And no more place than nanotechnology will achieve these great new inventions and competitiveness that America is going to depend on, especially in manufacturing, where we've seen manufacturing drop as part of our GDP from about 79% to 17-18%, giving us a distinctive competitive disadvantage on a global basis. I'm proud to be Chairman and CEO of Nanomech. We're based in Northwest Arkansas, down the street from the likes of Walmart, Tyson's headquarters, and we've, over the last year, won a portfolio of award-winning inventions and commercial products, including innovations in machining and advanced manufacturing, lubrication and energy, biomedical implant coatings, and very strategic military applications. We feel we're poised for dramatic expansion of our manufacturing operations. I'm proud to say we're in the process right now of adding an additional 25,000 square feet to our existing factory. We've bought up the entire technology park that we live in with the belief that we will be needing that kind of manufacturing capacity to keep up with our demand. Today, the United States is locked in a moon race, in an absolute moon race with other major countries trying to take the lead in material science and bio-nanoscale engineering research, development, commercialization, in what is sure to be the next industrial revolution of progress. While these competitive countries lost out to an extent to the U.S. in the information technology revolution, they are determined to put enormous amounts of public and private capital to work to win this more important race. Given the monopolistic efforts of China alone to control all of the world's dwindling resources, today they control about 85%, the U.S. is now at great risk in not having the materials and the rare earths metals that are core to the most important manufactured goods that are essential to our daily lives. Nanoscale engineering is our greatest hope in providing a way to do more with less in amazing and sustainable ways to keep America secure and the world leader in commerce, technology, and especially defense. Speaking of defense, it is clear by now that the country with the best UAVs wins, and no weaponization area more than UAVs will benefit from the tremendous advantages of nanoengineering and manufacturing. This, of course, is not to mention the huge gains already realized in defense and national security and weapons systems, deploying quantum leaps in super advanced nanoengineered coatings, lubricants, fuels, energetics, faster processors, and battlefield gear, all due to nanotechnology. Over the past 2 years, I've had the opportunity to participate in the Council on Competitiveness Executive Committee, as well as its U.S. Manufacturing Competitiveness Initiative and the Office of the Comptroller General Study on Nanotechnology. I take this opportunity to offer my perspective as an entrepreneur and a nano manufacturer. Many U.S. states and localities do too little to attract manufacturing facilities, imposing complicated, time-consuming procedures on top of federal rules to site and build production facilities. The permitting process for a manufacturing facility in the United States might take months, if not years, where in some countries the time required is merely a few weeks or less. We're certainly offered by China and Russia, it seems like on a quarterly basis, to move our entire operation there. Never will do it. Former ex-pilot in the Air Force and definitely a patriot, and we just won't do those kind of things. We don't even take their money, even though they offer it to us all the time. Consider, for example, Nanomech, though, as our very safe product platforms. I don't know of any nanotechnology lawsuits for liability in the 30-year history of nanotechnology to date. We utilize conversion assembly so that we can nano-engineer tremendous improvements in many products, and through this process, what we ship, even though nano-engineered and nano-manufactured, is no longer at nanoscale, but vastly superior to conventionally manufactured products. We're developing cutting-edge technology that enables dramatically more efficient industrial processes and therefore can save billions of dollars across several industries while dramatically increasing performance. At the nanoscale, we and other manufacturers can reduce or eliminate harsh chemicals and materials and replace them with more environmentally sound and sustainable components. We do that every day. One of our products is called N-Glide. This is a new super additive for the energy space. For that reason, we've opened up in Texas and are working with some of the largest companies in the energy manufacturing space. We add just a small amount of lubricant and we reduce the coefficient of friction down to literally zero. No wear, hardly any wear for that product going forward. We work with the largest companies around the United States in this. We also work with racing teams where this has all been demonstrated. Think of it, no wear. Yet higher performance, the ability to increase miles per gallon, miles per hour, reduce heat, reduce wear. One of the other products we have is called Tough Tech. This is where we spray a nano spray in a very safe facility with cubic boron nitride, the hardest substance known to man. When we do that, it creates a very hard coating surface on cutting tools. When we do that, cutting tools can last as much as 10 times longer. Of course, cutting tools are at the core of everything that's manufactured. This year, we were awarded the R&D 100, the Edison, and the Tibbetts Award. For that, the Tibbetts Award coming through the EPA. Talent is perhaps the most important driver for manufacturing competitiveness, especially nanotechnology. The United States needs highly skilled workers to realize the productivity gains essential to remain globally competitive in the digital and nano age. Yet current and anticipated human capital deficiencies exist across the board. Not only are current openings for highly skilled workers challenging, manufacturing workers are retiring at a much faster rate than they are being replaced. For that reason, we asked this committee to consider taking a real hard look at the area of visas. Visas has turned out to be a huge problem for us as we try to man and staff our company with the very, very best and brightest. At this point in time, it looks like time's up, so I'll defer to questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So all witnesses have testified. This is our opportunity to begin our questions for you. And so as chairman, I get to start. And I'll start with Dr. Bienek. Now, in your testimony, Doctor, you mentioned the interdisciplinary field. Could you expand on how you and the University of Nebraska are engaged in interdisciplinary practice and who is part of that and how it enhances the ability to advance nanotechnologies?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, for that question. Let me first start locally at the University of Nebraska. We have the Nebraska Center for Materials and Nanoscience, which is an interdisciplinary center where we work together as physicists, chemists, and engineers on nanotechnological problems. That includes a building where all the tools and from electron microscopy to X-ray machines to lithography are all housed in our actually quite new Voltaikegen building. And in addition, we are fortunate to have an NSF-funded MERSEC, a Materials Research Science and Engineering Center, and here the same spirit, interdisciplinarity. We have physicists, we have chemists, and engineers all coming together and working on nanotechnological problems. I'm also involved in two centers. One center is located also at the University of Nebraska, led by us. That's the Center for Nanoferroic Devices. It's an interdisciplinary research between 6 universities, and another center I'm involved in as co-PI is the C-SPIN Center, where 18 universities nationwide.
That's the C-SPIN, and what is that?
It's a lengthy acronym for a center where we, again, look for spintronic solutions mainly to solve, so to say, the barrier which is anticipated by extrapolations of scaling. It is known today that if we, in the semiconductor industry, it's known that if we continue the scaling, making things just smaller and smaller, we will hit a barrier latest by 2020, which is determined by many reasons and also fundamental reasons like quantum tunneling. And we are asked to look for solutions to solve those heat problems you mentioned in your introduction. And spintronic is one of those potential solutions where we use the spin degree of freedom and we can have new functions in our devices, not only processing but also processing and memory in one device. The spin or the collective phenomenon of magnetism is ideal for non-volatile memory, and we can switch those state variables also by electric means, avoiding electric currents. And that seems to be one way in the future to solve that problem.
And as I understand, there's industries that are also involved in so how do they participate? Talent, money, whatever?
They participate on various levels, mainly money, and that's a good thing. So, for example, the C-SPIN Center, if I'm not mistaken, we talk about a volume of $31 million of funding for a 6-year period. It's mainly by the Semiconductor Research Corporation, which is a consortium of the who is who in semiconductor industry, from IBM, Intel, Global Foundries, Micron, you name it. And in addition, also DARPA steps in with a certain contribution. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips, you take that nanotechnology and then apply it in manufacturing. I'm interested about how you make that shift and the capital that's necessary to get that done. How do you do it?
Well, it's pretty conventional the way American business is always run. You've got to raise capital to build anything, whether it's a space shuttle or a Dairy Queen. You've got to be able to capitalize it, and sometimes it comes from purely private capital. In my case, my capital as well. And then sometimes you also are able to get grants, both on a state and a federal level, and those are very important. So we have received over time grants from like National Science Foundation, the Office of Naval Research, Department of Energy, and so forth. Although very minimal compared to the totality of capital we've raised. When you build a company like this, the first thing you have to do is have the incredible ideation and invention, the concept and everything. Then you have to turn that into something that's manufacturable. You have to be able to create assembly lines that have quality control with repeatability, scalability, so that it prices out whatever it is you're manufacturing, that it becomes a must-have, but a must-have that people can afford. So it's basic business practices. In this technology, which is very, very new, there's more regulatory probably than conventional. We know in the U.S. that we appreciate the regulatory. We believe in safety and the controls that are in place, albeit we have to compete against countries that perhaps have 5% total regulatory cost against our 30 to 35% regulatory cost. So we have to build in an effort to accommodate that. Thank you. And my time has expired, and recognize the ranking member, Jan Schakowsky, for your 5 minutes.
Yes, Dr. Tour, I appreciate all of the commercialization, especially that, and the problems that you face because companies seem, you're saying, would want these tax breaks. But I want to just make the very clear point that you say without any new federal dollars. Not true. It's a decision on whether there's direct federal subsidies and grants, or we give tax breaks. There's a reason that we talk about tax breaks as tax expenditures, because clearly that is a cost to the federal government as well, any tax dollars that would be lost because we would. And so there's a lot of other considerations. Is it better for the federal government to make some of the decisions about where the money goes? Do we just leave it to the private sector? And I know others have mentioned public-private partnerships as another way to go. So I just wanted to make the point that this is not a freebie for the federal government when we say that we do it through tax breaks that we would give to corporations. Not ruling that out, but it's a trade-off that we have to discuss. I wanted to ask Dr.
May I comment on that?
Yes, of course.
I think that I said no new spending and no new allocations, because I well appreciate what you're saying, Congresswoman. It is a reality that when you don't have taxes, you don't have money coming in. So that's why I use the words that no new spending, no new allocations. But the other thing that I hope that I underscored is that it is really a dire situation in the federal dollars that are able to come in, and by doing this, somehow we're spreading the load out a little bit to incentivize industry coming in.
I'm all for that, and it's not a criticism. I just wanted to make sure that we're clear that it's one way or another, it's money from the federal government. I wanted to. Now, I just have a suggestion, Dr. Mertzich. If you added another vowel between the M and the R, if you added an E, everyone could pronounce your name.
You should see my mailbox. I have about 10 good versions of improvements on the name.
Just, an idea. Four consonants in a row. It makes it hard. Okay, I don't want to take up too much of my time. I wondered, I know that you primarily focus on nanomaterials for biological and medical applications, and I'm wondering if you could provide a little more detail on the research that you're doing. What kind of advances might happen over the next 5 to 10 years due to the research?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. In the area of therapeutics, one of the kind of very special properties that nanomaterials give us is the ability to target tissues more selectively. So a lot of drugs that are intended to act in the brain, whether it's for Alzheimer's disease as drugs are being developed, Parkinson's and others, those drugs have a difficult time crossing the blood-brain barrier. So they can be taken, they're in the system, but they don't get to the site where they can act and improve health. We've now found that nanoparticles, because of their small sizes, but larger than molecules, so they avoid some of the systems that molecules get tied up in, are much more effective at crossing that barrier. So this could be a platform to deliver medicines to the site where they can act, so that when we have a medication, a pharmaceutical, that's not useful because it doesn't get to the site, one can literally have to drill through the skull and put a device in the brain, or one might be able to use nanoparticle carriers to get them there. We still haven't worked through all of the safety issues and what the dosing should be, what the properties of those particles, but that's one example where nano would take existing trends and just put them at on a different plane.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about the support gap, but I think we've really heard from everybody that one way or another the United States needs to figure out how we support this industry, and I just want to make sure that that has absolutely been heard. In your testimony, Dr. Mercich, you mentioned the multi-agency structure of the National Nanotechnology Institute, but I don't know if you know that Congress has not reauthorized that or provided an updated vision for it since 2003. I'm wondering if there are any particular changes you think need to be made in order for it to get new life.
Absolutely. This the NNI started in 2000 has absolutely been a success in terms of creating an infrastructure in the U.S., making the U.S. the global leader in innovating and having the opportunities to translate into commercial entities. The NNI never kind of had its own money. It required the agencies to redirect a fraction of their budgets to nano-related research. I think we're at the point where we've got this incredible infrastructure, and we are now beginning, just in the last 3, 4, 5 years, seeing a reverse brain drain. Our best people leaving and other folks who would have come to the United States staying. And this is a direct reflection of the imbalance of research money and infrastructure that's available. So there's no question in my mind that in renewing, it's really reinventing the NNI to put real money behind it and to ensure that our best people have the tools, have the funding to continue on this incredible first 15-year history we've created.
So for me, lesson learned, private and public money is really needed to keep us in the forefront. Thank you.
I will not recognize the gentleman from Kentucky. Mr. Olson, you are recognized.
I thank the chair. And my questions, first off, will be for Dr. Tour. And Doctor, you mentioned in your testimony, you have 30 graduate students and undergrad and doctorate, PhDs, postgraduates working for you at Rice. You mentioned concern about the brain drain because many of these people come from overseas. How many people, that 30, are not from here in America? Just half? 2/3?
Of that 30, probably 25 are not Americans.
How many do you think will stay? Find a way to stay here after they graduate. You give them that great diploma, that sheepskin.
I would say that half of them will stay. More would stay if they could. The very best of the international students are returning to their home countries where they can get faculty positions. There are no opportunities for them here. There are very few faculty positions opening up in the United States because of the funding situation, and that funding situation being a lack of money that's coming in federal grants and mechanisms for that. So they're getting very attractive offers from their home countries or from countries like Singapore, and also, interestingly enough, the UK. And Europe, because of the large amounts of money in the areas, specifically in carbon nanotechnology, graphene. So many of them are leaving that would have liked to have stayed.
And Doctor, you said in your testimony that corporations lose their deduction if they fund research through your institute. Any example of a corporation that has lost their deduction, has not invested in your institute because they lost a tax credit, tax, whatever you want to say about the tax preference, whatever? An example was somebody said, listen, Doc, I want to help you out, but I just can't do it. I have to have that.
Oh, there are companies that have said that they just can't swing this, but the companies that have come forward are doing it anyway, but it's very hard to get companies to step forward. And if I can use this as a leveraging point, it actually works out quite well for both of us. And as to the amount of deduction that they presently get, it's very hard even to figure that out. I'm not a tax person, and I tried to get that data, even to bring it in here to speak to these companies, how much they say definitely that it would help if we had that tax deduction. But they didn't know how much they're really allowed to deduct, and different companies had different views on this and trying to understand the tax law even.
But it sounds like it does hurt for sure. I mean, these guys sort of sit back and say, Dr. Tour, you're doing great work, but I've got shareholders I've got to take care of, legal obligation to do that, so I may not invest in your great research because of our tax policy.
Absolutely, and there are companies that may even be in your district that have said that. I'm not exactly sure where the border of your district is.
It changes dramatically.
Yes.
But, sir, you and I live in the energy capital of the world, and so I'm thrilled about what's happening in the energy sector with nanotechnologies. On your website, it mentions oil and gas, enhanced recovery operations, those type things. Elaborate on those, what's going on, how you getting help from industry around there, and just what should be excited about.
Right. So we have a project that is funded in total by Apache Corporation, where we've been able to capture CO2 coming out of the natural gas well. So natural gas is a very clean sort of carbon fuel, 30% lower CO2 emissions than running a car on gasoline. But coming out with natural gas is CO2. That CO2 is generally just vented to the air. We have figured out how to trap it and how to send it back down whole, and Apache is working on the conversion of that to industrial scale for the deployment. We are working on nanoreporters, which this is funded by 7 different oil companies in a consortium that called the Advanced Energy Consortium, where we've developed sensors that can go downhole and they can travel through the sub-3 nanometer ports, the sub-3 nanometer pores downhole, and then bring up information as to how much oil is down there, and also nanoparticles for enhanced oil recovery, when they see that oil, to grab that oil and to bring it back up and then self-separate. So those are a few examples from the oil industry.
Finally, healthcare, medical. As you know, right across Fannin, across University, is the Texas Medical Center, the largest research institution in America for healthcare research. And you mentioned, website mentioned carbon nanovectors involved in this. Elaborate on that. What's so exciting about carbon nanovectors?
Okay, so we can take these carbon particles now, and all of this has been licensed to a company. They bought the whole suite of patents, licensed the whole suite of patents. This is in collaboration with Baylor College of Medicine across the street, UT Health Science Center, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and Methodist Hospital, and joint patents between us all. These carbon particles, they can trap something called superoxide. Superoxide, if someone gets a traumatic brain injury is the #1 disabler of young adults. And superoxide causes great degradation to the brain in the first several hours after. It's exactly the same as the biggest disabler in older adults, which is stroke. It's a lack of oxygen. There's been a blockage. There's a lack of oxygen. When that blockage is removed and oxygen comes in, superoxide forms, which degrades the brain. We inject the nanoparticles just before we clear the blockage, and then what happens is this sequesters the superoxide and makes it unreactive toward the brain, and so you get far less brain degradation.
A lot of time, thank you.
Recognize Mr. Johnson. Bill, you are recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I pass. Thank you.
Okay. Then the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long, you are recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Phillips, as someone who started a firm from the bottom, can you give more insight into the hurdles that startups deal with nanotech, that startups deal with nanotechnology?
Thanks, sir. I'd be glad to. We too, as a company and as a scientific nanotechnology company, the majority of our scientists are on visas or trying to get visas, to the tune of about 80% of those, and trying to maintain them in the United States is one of our most difficult problems. I mean, basically, the visa program in the United States is so out of date and so difficult that it's like we're telling our Einsteins and our Werner von Brauns to get the heck out of the United States, go home. It's exactly like that. We face that issue every day. We have a number of our scientists have become American citizens while working at Nanomech. I'm proud to say they've gone down to Judge Parker's courtroom down in Fort Smith, Arkansas, raised their hand, and some of the greatest scientists to ever come out of Ukraine, India, China have become American citizens through working at Nanomech on our nanotechnology. One of those scientists that came out of China ran the entire water management program for China when he was 29, is now a proud American citizen. But every day it's harder and harder with this visa program. We have one of our top researchers right now that is working on the most advanced systems for the Department of Defense in the way of creating the best body armor that ever has existed, totally fireproof, totally waterproof, totally antimicrobial, antibacterial. We've basically finished it, and we've been trying for 2 years to get his wife a visa to join him here in the United States, although he was educated here in the United States, received his PhD here in the United States. That's kind of an everyday problem for us in terms of the visa programs. Other things in nanotechnology that are difficult, I'm not a state-run company, don't want to be a state-run company, but I have to compete against state-run companies. In China today, they have the Nanopolis. The Nanopolis is a multi-billion-dollar project to create commercialized nanotechnology. They invite us over there every day. I've been invited to be their keynote speaker in China this year for the third year in a row, and for the third year in a row I'll turn it down. But they are really outspending us at this point in time in a big way, along with Russia. Russia has a $10 billion fund that they're operating in the United States called Rus Nano. Dmitry, who's based out in Silicon Valley, is a Russian who's been in trying to either invest in us and other companies like us, and has successfully invested in many nanotechnology companies in the United States as well as venture capital companies in an effort to gain access or if not even control of our nanotechnology that has been produced through billions of dollars worth of research through National Science Foundation, NIH, down through our incredible university system. So we have to capitalize this company in order to build a very fast, I think we're the fastest growing nano manufacturing company in the United States, to do things like we do, to create new types of greases and lubes. That may not sound like a very important thing. It may sound kind of boring, but the world runs machines. Machines run on lubricants. Without it, you don't run as well. So we're able to create lubricants that make machines basically last a lot longer. For instance, we believe if we were lubricating the Navy ships, and I've had conversations with the Secretary of Navy on this, we could extend the life of our Navy fleet immediately 10 to 20 years without any other expenditures and many things like that. So getting access to government type contracts is very tough for smaller companies. Getting access to competitive capital on a national and global scale through as public-private partnerships is becoming harder and harder. Overcoming this thing called the Valley of Death, where you go to full scale, scaling companies like ours. And we operate on patents that we've licensed from leading American universities. So just in the area of competitiveness, we have the willpower at Nanomech to grow this company, to provide incredible new technologies like very lightweight body armor that's much, much safer than what's out there today. New types of weapons that have never even been dreamed of that can be reached through nanotechnology.
Let me interrupt you there. I know nanotechnology is extremely exciting, and there are a lot of tremendous benefits from it. And I know that in my home state of Missouri, that Brewer Science has partnered with Missouri State University in my hometown, and have a very, very good partnership with the development of nanotechnology. So I think that some of these public-private partnerships are starting to take root, and I hope to see them expand. So good luck to you on your ventures. And Mr. Beenick, can you tell me, is Nebraska in the SEC?
That's a cheap shot.
Well, I know they're not, but I just love hearing it. I yield back.
We're united in being former members of the Big 12 with you. Recognize the gentleman from the SEC, Mr. Bilirakis.
Absolutely. Best team in the SEC, University of Florida Gators. Go Gators. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing on a growing sector of America's innovation economy. Nanotechnology is a sector that holds exciting prospects for the United States' continued position at the forefront of technological advancement and economic growth. Nanotechnology is the perfect demonstration of how the private marketplace continues to innovate to solve economic and societal problems. For example, in my district, Deus Analytic, which was named to the Forbes magazine's top energy projects to watch in 2012, has developed technologies and programs to clean dirty air and dirty water. Because nanotechnology is still a relatively new phenomenon, it is important that the federal government not stifle innovation and growth with burdensome and unnecessary regulations and red tape. And here's my question. I currently serve as the co-chair of the Congressional Technology Transfer Caucus, and am interested in how we economically capitalize upon the investments made in technology research. I understand that it may be difficult to transition from research to licensing to commercial development. Can you walk us through, and this is for the panel, can you walk us through the challenges that are faced in the stages of development, from patenting new research and technology to licensing it to companies to commercializing it, please? Whoever would like to start.
I can begin.
Okay, please.
I've done this a number of times, and having advances in my university lab lead to something interesting. Within the universities, we disclose that, apply for patents, and at the same time start to form a small company. That's sometimes done by raising seed or angel money. Sometimes it's done by going straight to venture capitalists if that's the scale of the investment required. And then from there it gets a start, and one's on the treadmill and hit milestones and raise more capital. One comment I want to make about nano, though, this is a new area. If you look at biotechnology, there are many repeat entrepreneurs that really are quite effective at getting new technologies out. There are venture capital firms and angels who specialize in that space, and so they're very sophisticated in recognizing opportunities and aggressively pursuing them. 10 years ago, there was just a handful of nanotechnology companies that got started. We didn't have the capital infrastructure, the sophisticated investors that made it more and the repeat entrepreneurs that made it more straightforward to get started. So as I look back, I think in my case, this is true as well. The SBIR program has oftentimes been the stepping stone to get IP out of the university into a company where you can start working on a prototype and de-risk the technology. And I think in this young field still, where many of the founders of new companies are first-time founders, they're not familiar with the process, and there are many barriers to getting going. Making it more straightforward to direct SBIR funds towards those folks. I would even think about a policy that said, if you have a research grant from the NSF or the NIH or DOE in a nanospace, and you apply for a patent, that you have a streamlined access to an SBIR to get that out of the university and put it into the commercial sector where it can get going. Because I think there's a lot of things that are left on the floor because, again, this young area with first-time entrepreneurs don't have as straightforward of a time getting something started. I'll let the others add other perspectives.
Okay, please. Anyone else, please?
Well, I've gone through this this many times. Let me just I agree with Milan, and I've known Milan for a long time. Is that what I'm finding now is that it's international companies and entities and investors that are coming and wanting to buy up the technology. Just recently, one of our patents was licensed to a Chinese company. for the development of supercapacitors, and they're going to take this on and make batteries for electric vehicles this way. 3 of our technologies are currently being licensed by the Israelis to start companies in 3 different areas based on the technology that was developed in our laboratory. There was a company that was going to start, and the tax advisor said, don't start it in the United States, start it in Singapore. And that was purely from a tax consideration standpoint. So, as no other time in my career, in the last year or 2, I'm seeing this coming of foreign entities and buying up U.S. technologies. And so the question then becomes, why aren't the U.S. entrepreneurs stepping forward as aggressively as the international entities? And I'm not sure that I have an answer to that for you, and that's something that there's probably you in this room have thought about this more than I have. But this is a trend that I'm noticing, that the biggest, the most aggressive buyers of the technology now, in my experience in the last several years, are not U.S. entities anymore.
Thank you.
Oh, what a shame.
Recognized gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did want to come back and kind of take off on Dr. Tour, what you were just talking about. What do you think we need to do to regain U.S. competitiveness for human talent and corporate investment as compared to what some of those other countries that are doing, that are state-sponsored, subsidized, countries like China and others?
Right. So even before coming here, I talked to this Israeli group that is licensing 3 of our technologies and starting companies, and I said, show me the tax structure of what it would cost me to start up a company in Israel. And they sent me the links to all of that data. And the tax structure is a lot more friendly towards small companies, especially if you're going to build your manufacturing entity outside of Tel Aviv, moving it in. So I'm talking about tax rates that are on the order of about 7%. So you look at numbers like this, and I am cognizant of the fact that the U.S. government runs on taxes. But I've started several small companies myself, and I'll never start another one again. It's a very difficult and arduous task, and so now I just go into the licensing and license it out to others. But the tax structure is quite aggressive here. And again, I'm deferring to what the Congresswoman said, and I acknowledge that. I'm just saying that when you look at the tax structure, it's very different. My testimony here is saying that without a proper mechanism for funding, many of these very smart people that we have are now leaving. The UK has come with a graphene and carbon program that is enormous, the European Union, that is enormous and funding at a very large scale. And they are trolling U.S. faculty. I had 2 offers in the last year from the UK to move my program there. My program that was 90% federally supported, 10% industrially supported in 2008 is now 80% industrially supported and 20% federally supported. Same amount of money. I've been able to make that transition, so my testimonies help me to make that transition. If the federal government can't step up, what can you do in the meantime to allow me to bring more money into my laboratory and my colleagues into their laboratories to maintain their programs here rather than just having us move abroad? Because these folks are industrious folks, and they're going to find out how to get their program continued. And if that means moving overseas, they'll do it.
So is it safe to say then that tax reform is critically important to retaining nanotechnology expertise in America and making us competitive?
I absolutely think so, sir. And I know that's not the direct privy of this committee, but I know that you have influence in that.
Okay. Dr. Binek, how can research consortia such as the Semiconductor Research Corporation be encouraged in the U.S.? Have you worked with other similar organizations or know of similar organizations working with universities to support nanotechnology research?
Yeah, in the case of the Semiconductor Research Corporation, their motivation is basically driven by, they look at the scaling issue And they know if we don't do something drastically soon, there will be a major problem, because who wants the next generation cell phone which just changed color, right? But there's no progress anymore. So, and this kind of driving force I think can be very strong, but and it can probably also be very strong, although I have less experience outside that semiconductor industry, for other industries. However, my concern here is that it's mainly short-driven to some extent. You know, they had to see the abyss in front by doing their own extrapolations, seeing that scaling 2020 will fail. And then they say, okay, we better do something. And now it's already a little late. And I think we should find ways to do something in advance.
Okay. In your testimony, you discuss U.S. dependence on rare earth permanent magnets, which are predominantly mined in China. So why are these magnets important to the U.S. economy, and what are the benefits of finding alternatives?
Yeah. So you find them everywhere, from your cell phone, in the modern lithium-ion batteries, and I was specifically referring to the important use of them in permanent magnets. There are high-energy product permanent magnets which enable this extremely lightweight electrical engines, which allow for this unmanned aerial vehicles, for example, or headphones even, and all kinds of applications. Wind turbines, for example, a 2-megawatt wind turbine has 800 pounds of rare earth minerals in it. So they are very important, and the thing about rare earth, as the name may suggest, they are not that rare. You cannot just mine them as other metals like gold or copper. They are not really concentrating that much. So you have to operate with large volumes and then extract small amounts of them. And that's a very costly enterprise, and also it comes with a huge burden on the environment. I mean, there are stories about these toxic lakes in China, which are a big problem. And so finding alternatives to rare earth is certainly an important thing, and nanotechnology, again, can help here. For example, in the field of permanent magnets, we do that also at the University of Nebraska. We use nano structuring of materials, bringing hard and soft materials into proximity, and then get those properties without rare earth, just 3D metals, for example.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Recognized gentleman from Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for being here and for your insight. It is certainly amazing, some of the progress that's being made and the excitement for the future of what we can do if we do this properly. And Dr. Bieniek, if I may ask a follow-up on Mr. Johnson's question specifically about the rare earth materials. How far away are we from developing alternatives and a commercially viable high-volume manufacturing process?
I think we are still quite a step away to replace them. Certainly we will not replace them with a switch everywhere. There are different field and different niche applications where we can hope to find replacements soon, but I'm very certain, as far as I can predict, that they will still play an important role in the foreseeable future in many applications.
Thank you very much.
I mean, I may want to mention that there is a mining operation also, again, reopened in the United States, but it comes with its own problems. Right?
Okay, and where is that?
To be honest, I need to pass on that.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Mr. Phillips, if I could ask you a few follow-up questions. In your testimony, you discussed the U.S. Permitting process for manufacturing facilities. Why is the timetable for approval longer in the United States than other countries?
Well, you could basically say the United States perhaps is more advanced in that area in terms of guarding safety and regulations and things like that. And to a great extent, a lot of those regulations are necessary for a good, safe country. But at the end of the day,
well, how have other countries, let's say,
they ignore it. I'm up against countries that don't even know what OSHA is. They have no OSHA. They have no requirements for insurance. They have no permits typically. And so all I do is try to make a comparison as to trying to compete against those companies in countries like that are state-run companies. It makes it more difficult for a company like us. Albeit, we work very closely with our municipalities, our state governments, and so forth to expedite those situations, to reduce the amount of paperwork typically that comes with it. A lot of it's incredibly redundant paperwork, committees upon committees upon committees that you have to deal with that I would say could be incredibly streamlined. Having founded a company in Mississippi, co-founded a company called SkyTel in Jackson, Mississippi that became instant messaging and ushered that in on a worldwide basis. I can remember back to the days of the 90s on how easy it was to do things like that. Of course, that was in the digital space as we moved from analog to digital and totally transformed the way business is done. I believe that the transformation that's taking place in moving from micron technology in a manufacturing scale to now nanoscale will dwarf all the benefits we saw in the digital world, moving from analog to digital. Unfortunately, as the testimony shows today, in Europe and Asia and so forth, they're taking nanotechnology tremendously more serious than the U.S. government is in terms of advancing it with incredible speed, with developing either public-private partnerships or outright gifts to corporations to make them competitive. We've seen a couple of those in the U.S. A lot of criticism about Solyndra. Solyndra received $500 million in funding and then went bankrupt. But in China, there were 4 competitors to Solyndra that received $5 billion each to compete and drop the price on a worldwide basis and took the worldwide lead in solar. And now the remains of Solyndra are owned by China, as is A123, our leading battery company that received $500 million in funding in the U.S., but compared to China, it was dwarfed. So although, you know, I'm not, again, wanting to be a state-run company or anything like that, we have to look at the entire business model on a global basis, not on a U.S. basis, in order to compete going forward. It's something we have to get a handle around, because if we don't make things, we really cease to be a country.
So what you're saying is if there's a way to fast-track some of this process, that's a great benefit to you. And you mentioned countries that maybe are not doing it right. Are there some countries that are indeed doing it well on nanotechnology R&D?
Well, you know, you look to Germany and Japan and so forth, and the amount of public-private partnerships that you see there are fantastic in terms of the speed, Sweden and others. And this is not to over-criticize my country, which I love dearly and represented in the military days. I think we're definitely trying a lot of things, but we're stymied to a certain extent in patents right now. The cost of a U.S. patent compared to overseas many times is prohibitive. And in the area of nanotechnology, in order to protect gigantic investments it takes to enter into a manufacturing as opposed to digital space, that cost is very high. I just hope 100 years from now, when America looks back, we don't basically say, well, we're the country that did Facebook, compared to the country that came up with new ways to manufacture, that totally created new cures, whether it was for cancer or what have you, in nanotechnology, and maintained a very competitive weaponization system as weapons became smaller and easier to perhaps control those weapons in strategic and tactical applications.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. I yield back.
Thank you. And the gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Phillips, in your testimony you referred to various policies that may be hampering business investment in nanotechnology, including the R&D tax credit. In 16 countries with a higher R&D credit than the U.S., and I'm sorry that that's the case, I believe that their corporate tax rate is different from the United States, and our corporate tax rate is among the highest, perhaps the highest in the industrialized world. Could you comment on that in a little greater detail, and any advice you might be willing to give us in that regard?
Well, you know, when we have a breakthrough technology that hits like digital, or like in the case of nanotechnology, maybe the federal government needs to perhaps look at investment tax credits on spending by companies in nanotechnology of a variety of types, so that they can capitalize their manufacturing facilities faster, perhaps do more research and development faster, and through investment tax credits produce new goods that return in the purchase of those goods through sales taxes and other type taxes, including income taxes on a federal basis, actually multiply the receipts on the tax base, even though in the early stages of those companies, those changes could, without question, accelerate the development and also lead to more investments in those companies from the private sector if it favored a technology as robust and as potential as nanotechnology.
Thank you. I certainly agree with that. Dr. Tour, the regulatory landscape for nanotechnology drives industries as how they look today. If you would, sir, could you expand on the regulatory process for startups and how Congress might be involved in improving the situation?
Right. So we don't have good standards now to make comparisons and upon which to really target ways to mitigate the problems, so that the improvement of standards against which we could direct these would certainly be a help for us to be able to move these along as we generate new materials. And then sometimes I served for 3 years on E-Track, which is a Department of Commerce committee to rewrite some of the export control laws. And because we have a very large book of things that we can export, and it was interesting that we couldn't export many of the things that are made overseas in much larger volumes than we're even making them. So we were hampered in that way, in many ways, and that even hampered the basic research of collaborating with people. So things become archaic, and after 3 years on that committee, I stepped down because everything that was proposed, I wasn't even sure if it was even read. And so I'm not sure that anything ultimately changed as a result of that. So I realize that this is a big country and lots of things have to be done, but some of these barriers that really there was no good scientific rationale for the inhibitions that were there.
And from your expertise, could those matters be changed by administrative rule and regulation, or would it require a statutory change, a change from us here in Congress?
I'm sorry, I don't know that.
Certainly, it might be easier if it were only to require some sort of change from the Department of Commerce or another agency of the executive branch. But obviously, we in our co-equal responsibilities are looking for statutory change as well to improve the situation.
Right.
Certainly, I thank you for your service, and it may have seemed frustrating, but I certainly think that it's important that talented professionals, including academics, are involved in what you do, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. And that concludes our question and answer period. I want to thank all of you for being here. I think you've enlightened us, especially on policy aspects, which is hopefully one of your goals here today. I think you've given us several things to think about how we can help improve the research and development of nanotechnologies in the United States. So I appreciate that. So with that, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
Well, let me just thank the witnesses. I mean, I think this is a real growth area for our country if we do the right thing. We have the brains, we have an infrastructure to do this, and it would just be such a pity if we lost this to in the global marketplace. So thank you very much for underscoring that and for sharing your expertise.
So we have up to 2 weeks to submit written questions to you. Don't know if there will be any, but we have that. And if we do send you written questions, we'd appreciate about a couple-week time frame to get your written answers back to us. With that, thank you again. You've been a great service to us, and we are adjourned.